Hi, I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. I'm on a day-to-day job. I work on a different Copilot, which is Copilot for Excel, Microsoft Excel. I guess most of you are familiar with the Office Excel. But today, I'm here to talk about developer productivity and how we, as people who write code, can use generative AI in the best way to help us be more productive. And specifically, I'm going to talk about GitHub Copilot. But first, let's start about why it's important. Recent survey has shown that 94% of developers are already using AI coding tools in some capacity, which means it's not a thing for early adopters anymore. It's not something. If we look at the number 2 years ago, it was completely different. We all know the transition that our developers are moving today. And I just want to raise of hand, how many here people are writing code? Just like developers, okay. How many here work with Gen AI tools when they develop code? Okay, how many of you are working with GitHub Copilot? Okay, so it is pretty similar to what I'm going to show here. The reason I'm talking about GitHub Copilot because it is the dominant tool on the market with more than 50%. There are many others as well, but this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to see some best practices, how we can utilize this tool. Many people are using all of these tools like, some kind of autocomplete for code, but it's not really only that. And this is what we're going to see. So first, what I'm going to talk about, it's two tools actually. The first one is GitHub Copilot, which is what we call on-canvas Copilot. It's the thing that doing the autocomplete on the editor. By the way, if you don't have it, you want it now, you can scan or probably Google it. And the second one is GitHub Copilot Chat, which is added late, after GitHub Copilot, which is basically another pane of chat, which is added, and you can ask things about your project, about development in general, etc. Before I start, by the way, I see people way back, so if you want to sit in the middle or something, feel free. So first, let's talk about what are the three key things that the developers of GitHub Copilot wanted to address. So the first one is helping developer getting up to speed. What does it mean? Getting up to speed with a new code, with a new project, getting junior developers getting up to speed with the project, and also helping people getting up to speed with code they're less familiar with, or project that they probably forgot 2 years ago or something like that, and they want to remind. Second one, writing repetitive code. This is the thing that we as developers are really like less. When we have to write unit tests or we have to write the same class over and over with different changes. And these are the things that generative AI are really good at, taking a sample and duplicate it. And the third one is diagnosing issues. Build issues, runtime issues, unit test issues, anything that you can see on the terminal, you can ask Copilot, help me figure it out, help me understand what's going on here. So what we're gonna see today, most of the session is gonna be live demo. We're gonna see how we utilize GitHub Copilot to write basic code faster, help us remember stuff we forgot, or maybe help us introduce to new stuff. Explain unfamiliar code, extend or refactor code, right? When we have some class and we want to change it a bit, understand error messages, generate unit tests, or ask general software developer questions on our project or in general, just like you would do with the GPT. So how these tools work behind the scenes? It's mostly the same. We have the GitHub Copilot engine, and it runs with two models. The first one is OpenAI Codex, which is a model that was developed to generate code, not text. And the second one is GPT-4, now it's GPT-4o. But basically, there are two models, and the engine decides which model to use according to the scenario. Now, these models are trained on all the public code out there, everything on the internet. Which means that if you're using more common practices or more common languages, you would get better suggestions. But if you use, I don't know, other languages like, I don't know, Pascal, something like, which is less familiar in the internet, so the responses would be not as good. Now, this is pretty similar to, you can say, maybe using GPT directly, but the benefit of using the Copilot, which is inside the editor, is that once we sign in and once it has some user info, like, okay, which language are you using, which frameworks are you using in this project, and then you open the editor. Once you open the editor, it sees also a sample of the code, what you expect in it from, and then you can ask it for suggestions. And you can ask it to improve the suggestions, and it will provide new suggestions, and the cycles goes on and on. And every time you change the context, like change the tab in the editor, of course, it will change the suggestions. So let's dive into the demo. I can show my screen. Oh, I'm still in presentation mode. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna present on like a simple JavaScript, HTML, just to show. So first, let's say I have here this HTML form with name and password, and let's say I want to add email. Now there are two kinds of ways we can do it. First one is what we call comment-driven prompt, which is like basically I add a comment and say email input, and then it will immediately know what to suggest. I will accept it with tab, and I have this thing. Now the problem with this approach is that we're left with a bunch of comments on our code that we probably need to delete later, or it's pretty weird. Also, in some cases we're like asking it directly. We can say like add email input with blah blah blah, and we don't want to leave these comments. So another way is to do Control I. Control I is like a shortcut to open Copilot pane, and we can ask add email input. And there it is. I can also toggle and see what was before, what it's suggesting now, see the changes. And let's accept this. So this is basically the best practice of using, use the chat and not comments. So now let's move to the JavaScript. I can close this HTML now. And I have here just like event listeners for the user and password. Let's add another one for email. So you see this pattern. Why is it suggesting it? Because usually the common practice is to use to have in the form user, password, and then submit button. But I need an email, so once I start typing, it will usually so email input, and I will have another one. This one would be an event listener to listen to this input, like whenever I change the input. Now let's say I want a function that once it gets an email, it will check the pattern and see that it's a valid email format. So again, I'll do Control I and I'll say add a function that checks if the email is in a valid email format. There it is. Let's accept and see what's happening here. So it sees that we're using something called hidden input, so it's also generated it. It's making sure if it's an email, use another function called isValidEmail, which was also provided by Copilot. And now let's see what I can do with this. So first, let's say I'm a developer that don't like regex. I don't like regex. I don't understand what's happening here, and I want maybe to simplify it. So I can select this and click on this thing and say modify using Copilot. And now I can say don't use regex. And there it is. Basically, it took the regex, it understands what the regex is doing, and now it provided just functions that say, okay, check that there is a @ sign, and after that there's a dot, and it's basically converted it. I know people using modify to, for example, take entire JavaScript file and transition it to TypeScript or TypeScript to JavaScript, or maybe take a class and say, I don't want it with a constructor for this class. I want it a singleton. You can ask a bunch of stuff. Just make sure you highlight the relevant part of the code. So let's discard this for a second. Let's see what else we can do here other than modify. If I go back to the control I and do slash, so there are 4 different prompts here, you can say, commands that will build already, which will give us some kind of shortcuts. For example, let's say I want to document this function. I can just do /doc. Now I can add more comments to the doc, like if I want specifically to ask for something, but I don't really have to. I can do this just the /doc, and there's a entire prompt behind it that understands the language that I'm using, what is the best practices of doing comment in this language, and it does it. So when I can accept it and see I have a function, and it takes a param, and it returns a boolean. So this is great. Many developers, we forget, or we don't want, we don't we don't like to do all the documentation and comments and stuff. Usually before I submit a code, I take my entire functions, mostly the one which are external, which are exported, and I document it. It's usually doing a pretty good job. What else we can do? Control I, /. And let's say I'm new to this code and I want to understand what's happening here, what this code is about. So I can do /explain. Okay, so let's see what's happening. So it's really explaining a lot here. What I like about explain, you see, it's not only saying like in a sentence or two what this function is doing. In this case, we have a regex, and it's actually breaking down the regex to parts and explaining each part of it. Now, the explain is not really only explanation, it's really learning, like helping us learn code that we don't understand. It's really great technique to learn, there's no way you could take this regex and look it online and get explanation. Also, when I explain, I can ask for more specifically. I can say explain something like specifically, or explain the regex, or explain why it's working or not working, etc. Okay, let's close this. Let's see other things we can do. So fix. So let's say while I was developing, I accidentally deleted part of the regex, like this. Now the regex is not working anymore, right? And it could take, if I don't figure it out, or maybe someone else already submitted this and this is how I got the code and I have no idea why the function is not working, I can always start by doing the /fix. Now, sometimes the /fix is working on the first try, like this, you can see. It has the problem with the regex pattern is incorrect. And if we toggle the change, we see it found the missing piece of my regex. Now, as a developer, it could take me like, I don't know, 1 hour, 2 hours. Of course, if there's a long call stack and I'm not sure where exactly the problem is. And I really recommend first try the /fix. It sometimes can surprise you. Sometimes it doesn't. /fix is not really running the code and like checking, doing some kind of automation. It's just looking at the patterns of the text. So in some cases, we'll have to be more specific, like say /fix. The regex is not working, or I provided an email like this, and it says it's not an email, but it is an email. Or give it some examples, things that you experienced, and would do probably a better job. So let's accept the fix now. And the last command on the / here would be tests. So test, I don't have to specify too much. test would basically just try to see what the function is doing and provide all kinds of scenario tests when it's failing, when it's not. So let's accept. Once I accept this, you see it created a new file. I'll save it, Control S. And the new file, as you can see, is really matching the common pattern in JavaScript when you have a test file, which is exactly the same name as the JavaScript file, but with .test.js, and created it on the same folder. Now let's look specifically at this file. So we see like 4 cases where there's a valid email, and some cases where it's not valid, no @ no dot, etc., etc., which is great. Now let's see what else we can do. So I got this code, but I have no idea how to run it. So now let's open the chat, which is here. In many editors, it could be in a different place, but Copilot is in most of the common editors, not just Visual Studio. So now we can ask, suggest ways to run these tests. Now we see it already has my file as reference, so it knows how my test looks like. Okay. So it looks like you're using Jest, which is a package to run JavaScript, and it's suggesting to add Jest config. So let's apply changes. What is that? Oh, I see it was added. Let's go back to the chat. Then I need to install. Now, once it gives me a terminal command, I don't even have to do copy paste. There's also here insert into terminal. So just insert and press enter. Where is it? Okay, yeah, it's running. Okay, and then create a just config with the value command. Oh, wait, I created it already. I think it already has it. Yeah. And then finally you can run the test with the following command. So again, insert it to terminal and run it. So it saves me a lot of time going to my going to my browser, and there's something failed here, and let's see in a bit what we can do. But it saves me a lot of time going to the browser, looking for Jest documentation, Jest onboarding, see what the commands I need to do in my specific project, and what do I need to add, etc. Let's save it. Maybe it didn't save. Let's try again. Run. Okay, so it gave me an error here. Let's see what I can do with this. I can basically highlight my command and this thing, the response, and I can do right-click, Copilot, explain this. Now, the same way I ask for explanation on code, I can ask for explanation on terminal issues or terminal bugs. So basically, it's saying that I'm missing something, etc., etc. I can try to look at it. It will always suggest some solutions, and I can also continue the chat here. Since it opens on the chat, I can say that didn't work. Please suggest another way. But it's a good way to start, and it really helps. In many cases, also when you debug, when you see the crash, you can ask things about it, and it's really great way to start. Not always you would get the first, we get it in the first try, but I would give it a try. So let's go close the chat for a minute, and we'll come back for it in a second. Let's see what else we can do with this code. So let's say I want more scenarios. So usually Copilot is really good with seeing patterns and understand how we can add more. But I don't have to accept it immediately. You see here, when I hover on it, I see there are 2 suggestions. This one just like starts with something with only the start. This one has a longer suggestion, which is a full suggestion, and I can always toggle and between the suggestions. But I don't also have to get the entire suggestion with the tab. And once I get, let's get another one. Once I get a suggestion, I can do also control arrow and accept it token by token, or you could say like word by word. So let's accept this, or accept everything. Let's go on again. What is that? I don't know. Okay, so let's accept, and then here I can, again, once I accepted a bit, I can over again and see what other suggestions it might have for me. So you don't have to accept always by tab. And another way to do it, which is probably the best way to get suggestions, is Control Enter. Control Enter is another pane, is Copilot Suggestions pane, because you can't see all suggestions on Canvas, like on the editor itself. When you do Control Enter, you will get much more suggestions. Here I can see 9 suggestions of many other scenarios that I could think of. I really recommend when you use and it's not really what you wanted, the recommendation, try the suggestion pane. It will probably give a much better outcome. So here I accepted it. It finished here, and I can continue it or just delete this last one. So you can see how in a matter of seconds I've done, like, I created code, I created documentation, I created unit tests, I know how to run it, and I created more unit tests. Let's go back to the chat a bit. So if you've worked with the GPTs or LLMs, so the context is really important. Whatever you provide it as context, as it would be more accurate, so you get more accurate results. And when we do a chat, it usually gets, as you can see here, it's showing you what's the context, which is the current file. But I can be even more specific, or I can give it more context, because sometimes the current file is not enough. So let's see how we can do it. The first one is the at symbol. At symbol is saying, like, in high level, what do I want to ask about? So I have, like, for example, workspace. Workspace is if I want to ask something about my code, okay, my code, my project. VS Code is if I want to ask something about the editor itself, like how do I debug, how do I move from dark mode to light mode, how do I, things that related to the editor. Terminal, as we've seen before, if I want to ask something about the terminal, something in the terminal. What else we have here? These are the most significant one. So let's say, so this is the high level one. After that, we have the slash. The slash is the command that I want to ask. So we've seen explain, we've seen fix, we've seen where is that? Tests, but there are other stuff as well. For example, new. If you want to create a new project, so far we only changed existing code. But if we want to create a new project, we can use new. And it would give us like a template of something new, of a new project. If you're working with the Jupyter Notebook, so you can create new notebook. There's also something called search. Search is basically a way for me to create a regex to search. For example, if I want search all classes that has the word Copilot. So it created like a simple reject for me, and I can click search, and it will search it in the editor. Now, why it's a nice thing to have, because in many cases we remember there's there's an enum, there's a class that I remember that has this thing, but I can't. When I start to search, I see so many results, or I'm not really accurate. So the reject is a good thing to use, and once you can use LLM to write the regex, it's even better. So that was the slash. And if I want to be more specific, like saying what do I want to ask about, so I can use the star. And here I can say, for example, I want to ask about the selected code, which is the default usually. If I'm using terminal, for example, right, terminal. So I can do, I want to ask about the terminal less command, like I want to ask something about my less command in the terminal and the response, or I want to ask something about the code, the terminal that I'm selecting right now. Or I can say I want to ask about the entire file that I have in the editor, which is this one. And I also can do this slash star web. Star web basically means search the web for something. By the way, there's another way to do it. If you do no, it was changed. Okay, so if you do this star web, it basically, because you know that the Copilot is trained. The engine behind Copilot is GPT. GPT is trained on data from specific date, but sometimes we want to like recent thing. Like for example, I can do star web, and then what's the latest version of Node.js, I don't know, React or something like that. I can ask. I can also give it, and I can ask what's the latest version of the package that I'm using. I can do combination. Oh, I didn't show you this star file. If I want to add other files to my context other than the current file, so I can do star file, and then I can say, okay, let's add this one or this one, and I can say, and the new combination, I can do this web, look for which packages I should update in the file, and then package.json. Like it will look at my package.json, it will see which packages I'm using, it will look for the web and see what new versions there might be, and it will suggest ways. Now let's go back to my example of the tests not working. So I can do something like this. The test from file script test.js failed with terminal less command. And I can also add something more. The test from script.js which runs code from script.js failed with terminal command, and I can ask for explanation. So I gave it as much context as I could give. Like, look at what test I'm running, look at the code that the tests are running, look at the failure, and please explain why it's not working. So this is like sometimes when we look something and we don't understand, it gives us sometimes some general answers which are not really specific to our cases, because it can't really feed the entire project as context. It usually just uses the open file and a bunch of other things, and I'll explain later what other context we have by default. But this way we can actually navigate it to use specific context. What other context the chat here is getting? It's also getting the chat history, which means that if in some cases, when you ask something and it gets stuck on the same answer, it's because it has the context of the previous answers, and it sees it as examples. So if we don't like what we've seen in the history, we can always here open a new chat. And you see here I have in the history, I have history of my chat, so I can always come back to that. But if I don't like, for example, a specific question and answer, like this one, I can also do this, remove request, which will remove the request and the response of this specific prompt. Why is and we want it because, you know, sometimes we have a really long chat and we're satisfied with it, but there's something was wrong with it in 1-2 conversation we had, and we want to delete it from the context, so it will start. It will not have it in the memory. Okay. So this was the demo. Now we're gonna go back to a bit of tips. By the way, we will have time for questions later. Okay. So what have we seen? We've seen how Copilot can help us write code, help us explain stuff, refactor code, right? Remember with the modify, understand error, generate unit tests, or ask general questions. There was a research done where they took developers and asked them to write a web server in JavaScript, and they split the group to two. Half of them used Copilot, half of them did not, and half that did use Copilot had a higher success rate, but did it with in more than less than half of the time So we can see here, and the demo also shows that using these tools really brings a lot of time saves and really helps us be more productive, because we are more focused on work that which is actually the core of the development. Other studies also have shown 87% have less mental effort on repetitive tasks, you know, like writing unit tests, for example, as I mentioned. 74% can focus on more satisfying work, because once you let the AI do all the things that you're less satisfied with, so you're left with much with more things that you like. And 73% said they're more in the flow. What is the flow? It's just the situation where we like in front of the, like we're like in writing code, and sorry, we don't have a lot of context switch, and we don't and we're like writing and we're really focused on it. And why is that? Because once we have everything in the editor, we don't need to go to the browser, look for Google, look for Stack Overflow, and etc. We can ask everything inside the editor. It's helping us being more focused. Sorry. So let's talk a bit about context. So what is other context that is provided to the LLM, to the GPT? So the first one is the open files. As I mentioned, obviously the open file in the editor, but we have a concept called neighboring tabs, which is like the tabs next to the open tab. Now it's usually it will not get the actual code from the neighboring tabs, but it will get maybe some comments from them, things like that, to understand what other things exist in your project. But of course it's limited, because if you have many open tabs, it will not probably get all of them. So the suggestion in this scenario is like, once you work on something, keep open tabs only the ones that are relevant to the test that you're working on. Top level comments. These are the comments at the beginning of the file that explain what the file is supposed to do. It really gives a great context for Copilot to understand what's happening in the file and what other suggestions it could provide. What is this beeping thing? Oh. Other things are the includes and the reference, all the imports at the beginning of the file. It really helps Copilot to understand which project you're using, which other packages you're using, and it can actually suggest code from them. Use meaningful names. What does it mean? If you work with, like, for example, JavaScript, there are no types. So if I name a const, if I name a variable user, Copilot will understand it's a single object. But if I name the object users, it understands it's an array and it would give me suggestion on array. So I have to really be specific and use meaningful names for everything that I'm doing. Specific comments are like the comments at the function, at the property level. They also help a lot for Copilot to understand what's the function is about. In many cases, it would, if you only have a method without the commentation on it, it will not understand it in the context. It will not understand it can use it or what the function is doing. But if you have comments, it will see everything in your file and will see in high level what other helper functions you have there, and it will also put them inside the suggestion that it gives you. And the last thing is code samples. As I mentioned before, it looks at the editor and see your open code. If you're not satisfied with how your code looks like, so you probably won't be satisfied with what Copilot is bringing you, because it does look at the sample of the code that you have. I know in my company, in some cases, we first modify the code. If we know we want to do refactoring or change things, so we first modify it and make it look better or more suit for what we need, and then we ask for suggestions, because then the suggestions would fit what we needed. But of course, there are limitations. So the first one is, as I mentioned at the beginning, training data impacts suggestions. If you're using a design pattern or a language which is less familiar in the open source or in the internet, so the suggestions would be not as great. Copilot is not a compiler, which means it doesn't run the code that it gives you and make sure it runs. It's also not doing some automations. It's also not doing security review for you, etc. It means, as we always say, you are the main pilot. You have to be in charge of what the suggestions you are accepting, and always make sure it fits your needs. Try to be single and specific in the test that you're giving it. If you're giving it like a huge prompt, like I want a project that does X, Y, Z, and I want a file and another file, it will probably either not do a great job or start to do a great job and then end in the middle because it ran out of tokens, because we have limitations. Try to be single. Like when you work on a new project, first ask for a skeleton of the project, and then ask for only only the headers of the methods, and then go over method by method and ask Copilot to fill it with code, and then documentation, then etc. Show the right context. As I mentioned before, make sure that the open tabs are relevant to the task. Make sure that the history of the chat is relevant to you. And the last thing, try to rephrase. I know that I'm in the cases I try to do like regenerate, and it's not working. It's always giving me the same results. But sometimes rephrasing can do really good. There was a recent study. Let's see, yeah. There was a recent research done where they had two prompts, and the second one, it was like the original one, but they added the psychologically sentence says, "This is very important to my career." And all models that were tested gave much better results. Now, I don't know why. And in some cases, when we talk to GPTs or we say, please Like, why do we even say please? It's a machine. But in many cases, rephrasing, we can see, and this is like an example of rephrasing, can provide much better results. So I would give it a try. If you want to learn more about GitHub Copilot, there's another link here, GitHub Copilot Fun. You can probably also search it online. And that's it. Thank you very much. If there are any questions.